Hi, folks, welcome back. Here we are with our next recorded lecture. Today, we're going to be talking about reparations. We're going to go ahead and go through about half of these slides. Again, my name is Victor Fabiano Bundes-Guerra. I'm your professor for this class, Philosophy 110, Introduction to Philosophy. Let's go ahead and get started with these slides. Okay, so outline for these slides. Let me go ahead and shrink my head real quick. If this cooperates, there you go. We'll talk about what reparations even are. Chances are some of you may not know. Don't worry, we'll go ahead and define them. We'll look at some common objections and responses. We'll look at examples of reparations from the past, and we'll also see some obstacles, we'll see, particularly with Black Americans, which have stopped them from creating intergenerational wealth. And as we're going to see, the idea of wealth as well as intergenerational wealth is going to be a big player in this conversation. We'll look at the Coates piece, the case for reparation. We'll look at the Roberts piece. The Roberts piece we'll probably look at for our next recorded lecture. And finally, we'll look at one final piece from a politician. I think her name is Cori Bush. We'll look at that at the end. But with that said, reparations, what are they? Well, broadly speaking, they usually mean financial compensation that seeks to address wealth and opportunity gaps resulting from historic injustice. In the case of America, we usually speak of reparations for Black Americans for enslavement, slavery, as well as Jim Crow, the laws that we put in place after the Civil War, which segregated Black Americans legally, but also made them second-class citizens and took away a lot of their rights. So this is based on the idea when we talk about it in philosophy of reparative justice, the idea that victims of wrongdoing or injustice are morally entitled to some form of repair. So if someone wrongs you, someone does something bad to you, they probably don't only owe you an apology, but if they destroyed your favorite toy or your favorite, I don't know, burned your money, if they burned your money, they owe you that money as well as an apology, we would usually say. Repair. Now, here there are many objections, but the basic idea here is when we're talking about slavery and Jim Crow reparations is that Black Americans today should get some type of financial compensation, some money. So here are some common objections against that, of course, because there's many of these. So probably the most common objection against it is that the original slaves or the original enslaved people, the people who were enslaved, have already died, the death of the original victims. So the idea is, or the objection goes something like, no one alive today is enslaved. So to begin with, there's a bit of a response to this, right? To begin with, first of all, you can be forced to do labor in prison. So that could be considered contemporary, modern day, present day slavery. So that's probably the first thing that we want to sort of look into. When you are forced into labor in prison, you do get paid like 10 cents, 20 cents, 30 cents an hour. So it is technically paid, but it is forced to labor. Keep that in mind. The United States does allow us, prisons, to force labor onto prisoners. So that's the first thing. How does that factor in? Are they technically enslaved or not? Secondly, right? Even though, or this is the response from Frigault, by the way, even though the original victims have passed away, they are dead now, none of them live, the benefits that white slave owners, white enslavers had, right, the money they made off of their slaves, that was passed down and has been passed down through generations. There are many, for instance, white families or families with white ancestry, better yet, right? Families with white ancestry who can trace their origins back to white slave plantation owners, and they can trace their intergenerational wealth, whether that be an inheritance, whether that be property like houses, back to them. So the response that Frigault will give at this point, and again, this from your reading, is that if benefits such as inheritances, right, houses, cars, just money, wills, if those type of things can be passed down intergenerationally, benefits can be passed down intergenerationally, why can't harms such as theft and compensation also be passed down and be felt by descendants? Frigault's response will be, no, benefits can be felt by descendants, as well as harms. They can also be felt by descendants. Here's another objection, right? That too much time has passed already. Too much time has passed. This happened over, I don't know, 150 years ago, or at least enslavement, right? You might say that they need to, or they or people will need to get over it. But the response to this is going to be very similar to the previous response according to Frigault. Harms and benefits are still felt by many and can be traced back to systematic racism. Here, again, we look at the idea of intergenerational wealth in America. America doesn't have a lot of social mobility. A lot of what we can hope for is to set ourselves up to then set our descendants up to move up in class. However, as we're going to see in just a moment, not only has slavery and Jim Crow stopped Black Americans from developing intergenerational wealth, but so have a number of other racist obstacles. And third, right? The third response, it might be or the third objection to reparations might be that it's owed only by those who did wrong. Only the slave owners should have to pay, and they're all dead. There's a response to this too. His response is that, look, you can be obligated to do something without having done anything wrong. So suppose that this is what we call in law the idea of liability. Or if you want to get more specific, you can go into the idea of unjust enrichment. And you can look that up on your own time. But the example that Frigault gives is that suppose your dog caused some property damage and it really couldn't be avoided, right? It was nobody's fault. There was no blame attached there. You might still be sued and you might still be held liable to pay for that damage given that dog is yours, even though you are not blameworthy and didn't do anything wrong yourself. So if that's possible, America as a whole, non-slave owners and descendants that were descendants of slave owners, as well as maybe non-descendants, might still be responsible through tax dollars and through association of America, being citizens of America. So often we in America, and this video you're gonna have to look at, I'm gonna tell you to watch it in a moment, but you're gonna have to watch it on YouTube because it's age restricted. It should be down below. But often one of the things that opponents of reparations say is that look at, for instance, Asian Americans, they were able to build intergenerational wealth or build money, or maybe even look at maybe to some extent, Hispanics, while Black Americans remain some of the poorest in the nation. And you might say, as an opponent of reparations, that it's their fault. But keep in mind that the Black population is a very unique population in the United States. Not only are they the only population that came here unwillingly, but they're also a unique population in the sense that they have had, arguably more than anyone else, any other population, more obstacles to building intergenerational wealth. So, for instance, they've experienced redlining, where they were purposely kept out of richer neighborhoods because they were a bad investment. Jim Crow, of course, that treated them as second-class citizens. Segregation, which kept them separate but equal, which of course was a lie. We also had mass incarceration. The United States has more Black and brown people, more people in general, most of them being Black and brown, in jail than any other country in the world. And we also have felony disenfranchisement, meaning that in the law of states, if you have a felony or a past felony, you can't actually vote. So you can't actually vote for what economically interests you. The video that I'm asking you to watch right now is about the Tulsa Massacre, which is sometimes called Black Wall Street. It was an instance in the 1920s in which Black Americans were able to build a lot of wealth, a lot of intergenerational wealth that they could have passed down to their descendants. But as we see, America was quite racist, and they actually just destroyed Tulsa. They destroyed Black Wall Street. So I give this example in this video because it is a very explicit, very easy to see example in which Black wealth and Black economies were purposefully destroyed by America. So go ahead and watch that video. Content warning, it is pretty graphic, obviously. But at this point, you might be saying, okay, Victor, I understand the objections to reparations. I understand some of the responses. But has reparation actually ever occurred? Is it possible? Well, yes, reparations have occurred. We have actually done reparations many times in the past. And when I say we, I mean the world, as well as the United States. So first and foremost, right, it's important to note that when people say that it's impossible to do reparations for slavery, technically speaking, that is incorrect. We have already done reparations for slavery. However, not the way that you might suspect. In about, I think it was 1862, after the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln actually gave reparations not to black people that were freed after the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln gave reparations to white enslavers, the former slave owners, because they lost their property and they lost money. Their property being, of course, the human beings, the black people, the former enslaved folk. He gave them $300 in reparations for every enslaved person that they lost for their lost property. Of course, you need to account for inflation, but that will be much more today. So we have already done reparations for slavery, for the white enslaver, never for the people that were actually enslaved. Secondly, we also have the example of the Haitian Revolution. After Haiti revolted against France in 1804, France actually forced Haiti to pay reparations for the theft of their slaves. It's very messed up. Haiti was a big slave colony for the French where they grew a lot of crops, and it was basically a slave revolt. It was a very much a revolt with a black and slave consciousness to it, and they killed all the slave owners and they kicked them out. France got so upset and said that we're basically going to trade block you and keep you from developing your economy with any other nation unless you pay us reparations, because we lost money when you revolted and tried to and gained your freedom. And yeah, they were forced to pay reparations. It was finally paid off in 1947. It took them over 100 years to pay it off, and it did cripple their economy immensely. Again, another example of why intergenerational wealth among Black communities, not just American Black communities, but Black communities in general, haven't been very possible. Moving past Black communities, right? And regarding the Holocaust, West Germany gave $7 billion to Israel, the then rather new state that was seen as reparations to the Jewish community. We also have apartheid, where South Africa, they had a very big segregation called apartheid there, of course. You know this, hopefully. But they gave about 340 million to about 16,000 Black South Africans. That was a bit of a tiny fraction, but it was something. So we do see that it can be done. Other nations have done it, and America is a allegedly great nation, so we should be able to do it as well. We did, right? And for Japanese interns, right? During World War II, we unjustly sent to essentially prisons, essentially to detention camp, to concentration camps. We sent a lot of Japanese people there because we didn't trust them and we were just being racist to them. But we did end up America giving their descendants about $20,000 each. So that was a slightly good thing that we did. Well, not the internment, but the reparations there. California has a really bad history, in particular, of sterilizing people, making sure that they can't have babies against their will, particularly towards Latino women. This was a very big thing during America's and California's eugenics phase, where we wanted the white race to survive and Black and brown races to not survive. California did give 10 million to about 177 surviving victims. So again, these are just some examples. This will be the last example I show you. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment was a very infamous experiment in medicine. Basically, there was a Black population, a Black community, and they were lied to and said that they were getting medicine to treat syphilis. But the doctors were actually not giving them anything. They were lying, and they were just wanted to see how long it would take for them to develop the disease and then to die from the disease so they can study the disease. So it was highly immoral, and it was done on the Black population, and reparations were given to the surviving victims, to the families, and the descendants. So this is all pretty bad, right? And obviously reparations are possible. We've seen it. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, in his famous article called The Case for Reparation, enters this conversation by saying, just mention the topic of reparations today, and a barrage of questions will inevitably follow. Who will be paid? How much will they be paid? Who will pay? People have a lot of questions. But he says, if the practicalities, if the details, not the justice of reparations, are the true sticking point, there has for some time been the beginning of a solution. Namely, in the bill H.R. 40, the Commission to Study Reparation Proposals for African Americans. That is a proposal that has been put forward in our Congress, in our nation, time and time and time again, and it has time and time and time again died. Or currently it's actually stalled in Congress, but no action is being taken on it. And notice that this is a bill not even to pay for reparations, just to study the details. Because if you're saying, I don't know how this would work out in terms of details, then let's put forward something in HR 40 to figure out how the details would work. But as Coates mentions, this bill has never passed. Never. Because, according to him, it's not the details that we're concerned about. We're just not interested in giving Black Americans reparations at all. If it was the details, then we would study this and figure out the details. But we don't, because we don't care. The idea of reparations, he says, is scary to America. Scary to Americans. Not simply because we lack the ability to pay. He puts the estimate at around 40 billion or more. We're going to see later a different number, a much bigger number. But the idea of reparations threatens something much deeper, according to him. America's heritage, history, and standing in the world. America being able to see itself as a great nation. And he says we must imagine a new country. Reparations, by which I mean, so he's going to have a different idea of reparations. For him, reparations is not only paying Black Americans, but it's also something in addition to that. It's the full acceptance, he says, of our collective biography and its consequences. It is the price we must pay to see ourselves squarely. We must no longer see America as the savior, but as kind of being the bad guy in a lot of these instances of history, particularly with the Black community. What I'm talking about, he says, is more than recompense for past injustice, more than just money, although it does involve that, more than a handout, a payoff, hush money, or a reluctant bribe. What I'm talking about is a national reckoning that would lead to a spiritual renewal. Reparations will mean the end of scarfing hot dogs on the 4th of July while denying the facts of our heritage. Reparations will mean the end of yelling patriotism while waving a Confederate flag. Reparations will mean a revolution of the American consciousness, a reconciling of our self-image as the great democratizer with the facts of our history. It would essentially look at, for instance, 4th of July, not as a day of freedom, but as a day as freedom for some people, but continued enslavement and bondage for a much larger chunk, for a different chunk of people. But okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and pause it here for today. And our next recorded lecture, we're going to go ahead and look at what Rodney Roberts has to say about the topic. But with that said, I'll go ahead and see you folks next time. Bye-bye.